Producer, many of you know her, Breege Hyland, and Breege is going to give us a little bit of local history, introduce us more deeply to Kilbride, to the cemetery, and just because we couldn't be here today, we have some beautiful images as well. So welcome, Breege.
So here we are. If the weather had been kinder, we'd be at Kilbride, the Church of Bridget. But let's imagine for a moment that we're here at Kilbride about 1500 years ago, in the early decades of the 6th century. This is the Kingdom of Awell, a vast isolated territory that hugs Kildare, stretching from Achill to Murrisk, under the rule of the powerful Ivreen. The new Christian message preached by the holy man Patrick since the last century, and continued still by his followers at bases from Ahagaur and Thurlock, has been spreading in this sparsely populated area. The growing of crops, the operation of a corn drying kiln, gardening, baking, hunting, fishing along the shore nearby, and salting. There are craftspeople, tradespeople, fighting men, and farming people that you would expect to find in any self-sustaining community. As the place invokes the name Bridget, the settlement here is probably modelled on the monastery founded by Bridget of Kildare just over 30 years ago in the year of our Lord 470. It is therefore a religious settlement for both men and women, a centre of worship, pilgrimage, care for the needy, hospitality, and education. Now in the year 2024, looking back through the mists of time, is it possible to know for sure who lived at Kilbride and how they lived so long ago? There is no historical evidence we can draw on to look with specifically to Kilbride. In imagining the place in the 6th century, as I have just done there, I'm drawing on what historians and archaeologists tell us about early medieval ecclesiastical sites in general. The local place names provide the tradition that a religious settlement associated with St. Bridget of Kildare existed here. A number of quite tenuous elements feed into this tradition. The local folklore, the occurrence of the historic graveyard at Kilbride, memory of the ruins of an earlier church that may in itself be predated by an earlier wooden structure, and an undated bull-on stone found in the environs of the graveyard. The establishment of the church at Kilbride has been dated by the local historian Pádraig Moran to the 6th century. Some historians argue that the Bridget of Kilbride is not the great abbess of Kildare. More likely she was a missionary bearing the same name, or perhaps a holy woman following the cult of St. Bridget. In the parish of Burrishoole, there are 4 other ecclesiastical sites more or less contemporaneous with Kilbride. In Rosglaive, to the west of Kilbride, was the settlement of Mercon. Along the northern shore of the bay at Ahadui Glebe was a site associated with Birrug, and just to the north of that, across the fields within eyesight, was another site associated with the holy woman named Sarneth. Further west again at Killeen was a significant monastic site believed to have been founded by St. Brendan the Navigator. The 5 sites all have their associated holy well and accompanying ancient traditions of pilgrimage, stations, and rounding rituals. Historical records show that the well at Kilbride, now dried up and no longer in existence, was located 2 or 3 fields over at Tubberbride or Tubbervreege, the well of Bridget. The location of the holy well outside of the enclosure and at a distance from it is similar to what you see at andHoly, or even more in evidence at Killeen, where the well is way outside of the enclosure on the shore. Stations were being done at Kilbride, at Breege, up to about 1895, and the tradition of visiting it for a cure for headaches was still alive among the local women in the locality, at least up to the middle of the last century. Birrog's well at andHoly, known locally as Tubernasool, is credited with a cure for ailment of the eyes. The story goes that Birrog, a devout young girl, gouged out her eyes and threw them to the ground in rejection of the avowal of a young man that he had fallen in love with the beauty of her eyes. Where her eyes touched the ground, a well sprang up, and when she washed her eyes in its waters, she regained her eyesight. The story is interesting in the light of versions of this legend that you hear around the country, and in which at least 3 cases the heroine of the story is Bridget. This, and the tradition that Bridget had a church in Kilbride, along with an interpretation of Birrog's name, that it could be a version of Breege, young Breege, contribute to a line of thought that Bridget and Birrog may be linked in some way. Bridget's dispute with her neighbour Mercon is the most frequently recounted of the stories about Bridget and about the local saints. Seemingly, her anger flared when, on going late to attend Mass at Mercon's church, she found the Mass was over and he had not waited for her. She cursed Mercon, saying that his church would be washed away by the tide. He responded that there would forever be a cure for man and beast at Rosclave. Further implications followed on both sides, and by all accounts, the dispute was not resolved. The initial curse of each on the other came to pass. If there was a winner in all of this, I like to think it was Bridget. The folklore recounts that people going to the station at Rosclave are to avoid Kilbride for fear that it will anger Bridget. And Mercon himself didn't really want to set eyes on Bridget either, for according to the folklore, he raised up Tom Riders Hill on the Westport Road, near the Black Palings, between her church and his. The Bridget featuring in this lore is a strong woman with an air of power and authority. She and Mercon are obviously rivals in a time when religious men shunned the society of women and excluded them from their monasteries. She's mindful of the type of woman that the historian Liam de Puer speaks of when he writes, quote, "It may well be that the great Irish monastic movement, which was to dominate the ecclesiastical history of the country from the 7th century through to the 12th, was pioneered by communities of women from as early as the 5th century." Unquote. By way of personal reflection, it's very special for me as a Bridget to be part of today's celebration, and I'm very thankful to Bridget Ann for involving me in this way. I'm thinking today of my Bridget heritage, my 2 grandmothers for whom I am named, my County Roscommon Granny Bridget, whom I never knew in person, but vividly through my mother, and my Grandma Beatrice from Mayo, to whom I was very close. An immigrant to the USA, Grandma Beatrice was a Bridget, that name given to the countless young Irish immigrant girls who worked as domestic servants in private homes in the cities of the Northeast USA. In Kilbride, the spirit of Bridget lives in the place names, in the beautiful statue of her that watches over the graveyard, in the crossogue wrought into the entrance gate, in the local stories of Bridget, in the rich crossogue making tradition of the parish. It's a blessing to invoke the name of Bridget in our personal names, in our place names, in our prayers, our traditions, and our practices, in the way we pass these on to our young people. When we think of Bridget's life and legacy, we need her spirit now, more than ever, to inspire us and to show us the way in a world so often in need of healing and hope. Thank you.
just as you finished there, Breege, talking about the cemetery, I really want to thank, I see him there, Padraig O'Malley. I want to thank him, and I want to thank everyone on the graveyard committee, because there was such love and care, Padraig, put into preparing for the day. The potholes were filled in. The statue of Bridget was cleaned and she is shining. Also, the statue of Mary. So I want to say thank you very much to Padraig and the graveyard committee. We spoke of Bridget as a unifying force, Bridget as a woman that went beyond borders and thresholds. I would like to introduce our next poem by her mother, the poet Joan Newman, which was commissioned for this Bridget in Europe event. Both Kate and Joan have given voice to women and men and expressed their own beautiful voices in many forms, especially poetry, and given voice to others through their publishing house. So please welcome Kate Newman.
My mother said she had heard Bridget Ann suggest the commission, and she didn't think she would write a poem, but St. Bridget told her she ought, and this is it. And I'm honoured to be here. 30 years ago, I was in Kildare at Féile Bride that Bridget Ann organised and Fergus and I supported, and it's just wonderful to be here. There is nobody quite like Bridget Ann. It's wonderful to be here with Emily Farinella, who many years ago organised some very generous reading tours for Irish poets in his home island of Sicily, and with Ger Reedy, poet whom I've known for a long time and have the greatest admiration for. So because of St. Bridget, through Bridget Ann, the potholes got filled, the statues got cleaned, and this poem got written. How much do you need? Bridgets I have known who carry your name, St. Bridget, and your wild desire to let no thing slip away become a negative. There was Bridget Mead, a poet among poets. She needed money, an unspecified amount. When Cathy spoke in the spirit of St. Bridget, I've got money, how much do you need? She paid back every cent, Cathy told us, and we were all glad that the spirit of generosity hadn't been used and abused. As if to repay us for our faith in her, Bridget Mead said, "Tomorrow I'll teach you all to dance." She was a belly dancing poet. And though we all shook our bellies and stood wide-legged to little avail, we tried, and St. Bridget was pleased. There was Bridget Winter, a great name, from Maharahoney. I drove her home from the cancer hospital some Fridays. This day she was crying because her consultant had told her that she must not keep in contact with people who had been discharged, people who had become her friends, because if they died, or if she heard that they had died, it would set back her recovery. Bridget knew that she would soon be one of the discharged herself, those for whom there was no cure. But St. Bridget sat Bridget Winter up in her hospital bed A room full of birthday cards and flowers and wine, and Bridget read her poems to us, and when we knew the lines, we joined in and made her smile and smile. A recent Bridget from America who didn't know St. Bridget stood at St. Bridget's place in Faughart, and the still air settled on her, and all that wisdom. And at home she sent a photograph of the pasta she had made with the labour of her hands. St. Bridget loved the sense of purpose, though the long strings of food were unfamiliar. Oh, and the close Bridget, Bridget of years and years, a woman of beauty and conviction, wants us all to honour St. Bridget. Oh, timely, timely. St. Patrick has to wait his turn. St. Patrick, whose name and day trip off our tongues. Sure, he wasn't even Irish, some might say. To St. Bridget, it is by our deeds. Deeds, not words. Deeds that cling to us. And she has been seeing us for 1,500 years, hearing us and touching us, maybe smelling, maybe tasting us. When St. Bridget speaks to us, she speaks her knowing. We need to listen. She tells us. She tells us, and then there is love. I've seen it, and the lack of it. Oh, love is a many splintered thing. Pity. We need to believe in pity